it's an amazing thing. Sean, every time I see him, he expands my mind and blows me out of the water.
It just shows like how powerful, like how the brain works. And I really think it's genius. It's true education here.
He's a great presenter. He gives you that energy. So I appreciate you, Sean. Great seminar, and I can't wait to see you soon.
I shared a really simplistic model of training, but I want you to know that there's a lot of complexities and details behind it. So if you want to learn more about that, genMAX, January 11th to 12th, we're coming to a city near you. genMAX 2-day seminar, we're going to cover all of it.
Now we understand that stress is anything that throws the body out of allostatic balance. And now's a great time to look at this analogy. So let's take a look at these young children, these young lads on the seesaw here. And let's use this guy and say that he is stress, and this guy over here, he's recovery. So whenever you have a certain amount of stress in the body, you need to have an adequate amount of recovery, an adequate amount of, let's call it, just dealing with the pressure of the stress. So our body's going to try and match the amount of stress down here with the amount of recovery and the amount of system borrowing, reciprocal control, or reciprocal borrowing and central control in order to match the amount of stress. But the problem is that in today's world, we have our cell phones, we have TVs, we have Instagram, Facebook, we have our jobs, our social life, our family. There's so many things that are going into contributing to what person or what figure is on this side of the stress equilibrium. And a lot of times what ends up happening is, instead of a little child here, we have a grizzly bear sitting on one end, but at the same time we're still trying to counterbalance that grizzly bear with a small child's worth of active recovery. We're not getting to sleep on time, we're not eating the right stuff, we're not active enough, we're not putting the phones down, we're not getting back to nature enough, and we're really having a hard time balancing out the grizzly bear's worth of stress with the child's worth of recovery. And now your body's going to have to work in overdrive in order to make up for the fact that there's so much of it, there's such a big challenge ahead of it, in order to try to balance that seesaw out. And it's much easier said than done. You're going to start losing energy. Your body has to prioritize where its energy is going, and it's going to prioritize to deal with the grizzly bear first before it's going to deal with any other the important tasks that your day requires of you, whether it be vacuuming the living room. We'll get to that in a second, but essentially what we're talking about here is that if you're not able to manage the amount of stress that you have, if you're not doing enough active recovery, if your body is incapable of keeping up with the grizzly bear on the one side of the seesaw, essentially you're going to end up like my man right here, and the grizzly bear is just going to swallow your face. So the problem with grizzly stress, as we already mentioned, was that the energy has to address the grizzly and not cooking dinner or vacuuming the living room. Secondly, just by the grizzly walking into the playground to get on the seesaw, he's going to walk right through the garden, he's going to cause damage. Just that sheer volume of stress is just going to cause damage, wear and tear. It's just not a healthy thing to have. You can't deal with the grizzly without throwing something else out of bounds. Remember when we talked about the principles of allostasis, we talked about how we're going to have to borrow things from resources from other parts of the body in order to deal with certain stressors that are coming into the system. As you pull something from one thing, you pulled something from the liver. Now the liver is a little bit out of balance, it's not working at its highest rate, and now everything else is going to start throwing out of balance when you have to deal with this one thing. And now as we go through this, remember to think about all the stressors that people have in today's world and how these can continue to be a problem. And lastly here, it's just tough to get the grizzly off the seesaw. Imagine trying to coordinate the effort of getting two grizzly bears off the seesaw without one crashing to the ground. That's going to be a massive, massive effort and quite a challenge. And ultimately what you're looking to do is you're trying to coordinate that so that it comes off, they both safely get off and get off easily. And now imagine that you take this grizzly bear on the left, you take him off all at once. So in essence, you remove all of the stress from the body. What happens when you remove all the stress from the body is, that's great, you took the stress away, but the body's still working towards towards dealing with that amount of stress. Now, remember in the allostatic and allostasis chapter, we talked about how the body is always going to try to predict what you need in the next moment. Well, if you spend a lot of time under tension with a grizzly bear amount of stress, and then you just take it all away, your body's still predicting that you are going to need to deal with that in the next moment. So it's going to keep giving you those resources until you can adequately prove to the body that it no longer needs those resources. So it's a really big song and dance. It's a really big effort, and it's not just a matter of just removing all of the stress at once. Okay, so let's look at Grizzly Stress versus Sean Stress. Grizzly Stress is, oh my God, a moose just gored my face, and I am hungry AF. These are the only things that a grizzly bear is concerned with. They're concerned with survival and eating, period, right? But us as humans, we'll look at myself as an example, there's so much more stress that we have to deal with, and that's going to go onto the left side of the seesaw. So my stress would be I have to run a business, paying a mortgage, I have to do this 8-hour presentation. Valentine's Day is coming up, and maybe I haven't gotten the gifts from my girlfriend yet. I was drunk last night, but what's that about? And reading ridiculous neuroscience material. That's quite stressful. I'll bring it back down here. So there's just so many things that we have to address in our day-to-day system and our day-to-day lives that ordinarily a grizzly bear doesn't have to worry about. So their bodies are much more capable of handling the amount of stress in their life than we are. And another thing to consider is that the way our body sees it, paying a mortgage, buying a Valentine's Day gift, there is no separation in how the body perceive stress. Stress is it's all or nothing. Your body either thinks that you're completely safe or being attacked by an elephant. That there is no separation. So every time that I'm stressed about paying my mortgage or having to run my business, it is the same stress response. Everything is working the same as if I were being attacked by an elephant. So now, having understood all of this, we have to ask ourselves a couple questions. So now, what is anxiety? What is PTSD? Now, these are two very real issues, but now that we understand predictive physiology, we understand that the body works off of memory, sequence, and prediction, we can understand that anxiety really is just some sort of memory problem. We're in a system that is drawing back on certain memories, and the association with those memories is causing you to be anxious. And then the same thing is with PTSD. You have such strong emotion attached to certain memories that when certain things come into your awareness or an information is gathered into your brain, it triggers this emotion, it triggers this event, because we all know that we could work off of the neocortex, and the neocortex works off of memory, sequence, and prediction, and then unfolding off of that is the predictive physiology of allostasis. So now we look at all this, and how do we actually treat this? Now, I know anxiety is treated with a number of drugs. I'm not quite sure of the methods of PTSD. I'm sure there's some drugs involved. I know there's therapy involved with both, but we really have to get to the bottom line here. We get to the bottom of all of this, and maybe we just need to change the associations with certain memories. Maybe we need to convince the body, just like we need to convince the body of that hypertension can be changed, and that taking the grizzly bear off of the seesaw. Maybe we just need to change the associations that we have with these memories, get back to the root of the problem, and convince the body that these memories and this neocortical associations are not necessarily dangerous. It's not a threat to the system. So in summary, here are some thoughts on all of this. Somewhere in the brain, all the critical factors must be weighed, a plan devised, and forcefully executed. All systems must adapt to a persistent signal. Period. End of story. Blood pressure, as we mentioned before, reflects behavior exquisitely. Once the brain predicts the most likely demand for oxygen, it resets the blood pressure to achieve the needed flow rate. Allostasis, let's get all this up here. A couple terms to understand, good to know as you move forward in understanding allostasis and all of this good stuff, is that allostasis is essentially achieving stability through change. Allostatic load is the result of being in an allostatic state. So how much allostatic load, how much has your body being thrown out of that allostatic balance? That is allostatic load, the cost to the body of adapting repeatedly to demands placed upon it. It is the protective effects in the short term, yet damaging effects in the long term. If we're talking blood pressure here, to just expand upon that a little bit, if I need to be vigilant, if I need to be really locked in on this presentation that I'm giving, I'm going to get a little spike in my blood pressure, a little spike in my heart rate, which is great. It's a protective effort by my body. However, if I'm constantly doing this, if I spend a lot of time under tension here, and and my body starts to predict that I'm going to need that vigilance in the next moment, it's going to have damaging effects in the long term because I don't always need it, and there's going to be a lot of wear and tear, and that child on the left side of the seesaw becomes a grizzly bear. Remember the water and the desert analogy as well. And then allostatic state is just a chronic imbalance in the regulatory system. So that is just, an allostatic state is somebody who is always chronically imbalanced. It is somebody who's always, let's say, with high blood pressure. So now it's starting to think about that and understanding it. We're talking, allostasis is really getting down to the fundamental root of what's going on in the body, just as what we're all trying to do here is get to the fundamental health. We're trying to find the foundation of how humans are supposed to move and function. With that being said, you really have to understand what allostasis is, and you have to be able to gauge the allostatic load of the people that you work with, the allostatic load of yourself, and just kind of understand who's in an allostatic state and who is not. In allostasis, there is a continuous reevaluation of the organism's need and continuous readjustments to new set points depending on demand. Coping with anxious depression results in predominance of expectations of adversity. Thus, one result of the inability to turn off cortisol's effects on amygdala function is the biasing of the brain towards chronically seeing events as fearful. These are just some points to drive home, really. Behavioral events among family members can be measured in the bloodstream of other family members. I think that's a really cool thing to understand, is that as we've talked about before, homeostasis can't cover everything. No set point will ever be changed in a family member if the set point is changed in another family member. But now we're starting to see that the bloodstream the event can be measured in the bloodstream of somebody else. That's just showing that neurology is playing a big role. The neocortex and allostasis is much more comprehensive in being able to address a lot of these things that are going on in the body. People who lack self-confidence and self-esteem will be overexposing their bodies to stress hormone on a daily basis that may not disturb others. So people with low confidence, low self-esteem, think about the amount of stress that they're seeing when they go out in public, when they're in social settings, and think about the chronic allostatic imbalance that they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. Reduced amounts of sleep for a number of days results in elevated cortisol levels during the evening. That throws me right back to the HPA axis. What kind of cortisol volume is going back up to the hypothalamus? Is the hypothalamus able to deal with it, or is it shutting down and having it constantly running HPA? People with negative social relationship histories have a higher allostatic load later in life than those with positive social relationship histories. And the allostasis paradox is a pretty interesting concept to wrap your head around, is that we talk about high blood pressure, and it's not healthy. You don't want to have that. But ultimately, these systems, under the allostasis theory, they are working 100% properly. But on the flip side, people are dying, but their internal regulatory mechanisms remain intact. So how do you treat somebody whose body's working perfectly, but they're at the same point they are dying? So just a cool thing to get your wheels turning a little bit, and really this is allostasis. You just have to keep your mind on allostasis. You have to understand what type of trainer you are. Are you an allostatic trainer? Are you a homeostatic trainer? And remember, I want to reiterate, I want to drive home that allostasis comes down to time under tension. How much time have you spent under that tension? And then predicting the next moment, predicting what the next moment will require of you.